one thing I think is unique about ADHD is it's not just only about the lack of education. It's also unique to have something that has so much abject misinformation and judgment out in the ether, so it's not only that the information's missing for some people, it's that there's just flat out misguided information out there online too. Navigate it with awareness and patience and care just makes whatever challenge it is easier to navigate. And that's why mindfulness is possible, with or without ADHD. This mindfulness doesn't say your ADHD is going to go away. It's a way of training yourself to live with whatever you're living with, the stories, the biases, and as best as you're able, just like see things objectively. My bullet point for parents when I'm working with medication as opposed to meditation is, no one should use anything medically they don't need in life, but no one needs to be particularly avoiding or scared of the ADHD medication.
Hello and welcome to the Attention Different podcast. My name is Stephen Tonti, co-founder of Attention Different, and today with me co-hosting this episode is my co-host,
Aaron Smith, and I'm a licensed clinical therapist and ADHD coach over at Potential Within Reach and co-founder of Attention Different as well.
Awesome. So have you ever walked out of a doctor's appointment feeling rushed, unheard, unseen, perhaps somehow even more confused about your ADHD? We're here with Dr. Mark Bertin, a developmental pediatrician who has spent his career helping both parents and kids navigate ADHD. Lately, Dr. Bertin has been sounding the alarm about just how broken ADHD care has become. For our discussion today, we'll get into why your inner critic isn't something you have to silence, how mindfulness works when your brain won't sit still, and what it really takes to raise a resilient kid when the whole family is wired a little differently. Whether you were diagnosed last year or are parenting a child through it right now, you'll walk away with practical, compassionate tools you can use immediately. We could not be more thrilled to welcome Dr. Bertin to the show. He is both a friend of the pod and a friend of Aaron's and mine from the ADHD conference circuit. Welcome, Mark. It's been a while since we saw each other at Jazz Fest, but it's good to have you here.
I know. It's great to see you. Yeah. It's a little different than seeing you at Jazz Fest, but, this will have to do for today. So,
Yeah. It's a little quieter.
Yeah.
All right. So to take us away, you're a developmental pediatrician. And for our listeners who aren't familiar with the differences of medical terms and terminology, explain a little bit about what that means in your specialty and how you ended up specializing in ADHD, autism, learning differences.
Yeah, it's a great question and not an uncommon one. There aren't that many of us, but developmental pediatrics is, I'll go to general and then I'll talk about myself. Developmental pediatrics is like a subspecialty, just like you can go to become a cardiologist, become a pulmonologist. So to become a developmental pediatrician, you do general pediatrics first, but then the subspecialty training is just in things that support child development. So my full title is developmental behavioral pediatrics is what I'm boarded in. So really most of my life, most of my day is a lot of work, more, I think most people would think is more in the world of psychology and being a psychologist. But that's really what it is. So my little subspecialty training, I don't do any of the general pediatric stuff anymore. I did that for a little while. My whole day is just about a mix of some diagnostic work, like sorting out whether somebody might have ADHD or learning disabilities, and then an awful lot of just coordinating care over time, just whatever. I love it, but it's kind of an unusual mix of doing some things hand-on, doing some things where I'm coordinating, like a school plan. So I do a lot of parenting work. I work with the kids as they get older. I can prescribe if I need to. So it's a kind of a mix of everything. And then for a lot of families, I think what is often lacking in traditional models of care is like one person just kind of keep track of the big picture. So a lot of families, I think it gets pretty overwhelming when, when parents are trying to coordinate the school plan and the two doctors they see and the psychologist they see and the tutor they see, and they're supposed to, they're just trying to manage all that and make decisions. So the role of a developmental pediatrician is a lot of supervising and coordinating that too. And I really got into this field because I just kind of grew up around it. My whole family's in special education. One of my neighbors growing up ran the local Special Olympics. And then when I was going through some pretty hard times as a teenager. I like volunteering there was a big part of my life. And kitchen table discussion growing up was around special education because my mom started a pretty well-known special education school. And so it's always just been a big part of my life. And I think the real, I don't know. I mean, I don't think my life was as linear as I think it might seem from the outside. I wasn't quite, 100% sure what I wanted to do, but working with kids was always important to me young. So I thought about, teaching for about 12 seconds, but I do not have the temperament to run a classroom. And then I thought about child psychology and thought about pediatrics and fields like that because I'm much more a one-on-one kind of person. And then, and that was it. I tried general pediatrics briefly, but I didn't really need the medical side, and I didn't like the time pressure at all. So, so this is my world. I mean, I like the switch from general pediatrics into developmental pediatrics has been kind of awesome. Really love what I do.
Great.
Nice.
And did you have any sort of, just curious, did you have any training when you were going through med school and other things regarding ADHD, or how much did you have in that?
Oh no, that's of the many things we can talk about and big can of worms to open up. It's like, no, that's not a big part of training in, certainly not in medical school. I mean, there's so many layers of that question you can talk about. I mean, it's not part of general medical training. It wasn't even a big part of pediatric training unless, you did unless you chose to do that rotation. It isn't like everyone knew it was there, but it's not really emphasized in a lot of detail in general pediatric training. And then a whole other thing you can talk about that is more and more of the research in ADHD talks about all the other things it impacts. So, I mean, I didn't go through training in adult medicine, but clearly it would make sense for it to be a big part of training in adult medicine because of all the Russ Barkley's new research on its impact on general health and all the other things it impacts. And it's it really, to me, should be emphasized in training. It's so common and it impacts so much, but it's not really, unless it's changed radically. Can't say I trained so recently anymore. So unless it's changed radically since I was in training, which I don't believe it has, it's definitely something that could be talked about more.
Yeah. And still, I think the diagnosis, most people, most individuals, I think, children in particular get diagnosed with ADHD. I think the last time I looked this up, it was 90% get diagnosed by their pediatrician or a general practice physician who may or may not have gone through any of that training. What's your opinion on that or perspective on that?
It's not, I think there's two different parts to that answer. ADHD remains clinical diagnosis. You're looking for a pattern of development. We still don't really have a test for it. And I don't mean there's no training in ADHD for general pediatricians. It's the second part of my answer that really matters. So I think for many children, if the symptoms are just clear, at least from getting enough of a diagnosis to get a academic plan in place, it's totally appropriate. It's not, it just depends on how black and white it is. But it is an observational diagnosis. I mean, we don't have better than that yet. The nuance, I think, though, that often gets missed is just how complicated and detailed ADHD intervention needs to be for most families. And so, just giving someone a diagnosis of ADHD, way undershoots ADHD. I mean, most people don't understand the broader picture of executive function, certainly as parents, until they're encouraged to learn it. ADHD interventions to me are hugely, multifactorial. I sometimes use this filling in pieces of a puzzle until the puzzle is complete, but it's lots of different things for most families. So, the model of just a quick diagnosis and then, here's, now take it to your school for a 504 plan, or even here's a medication, which is not a model I love either. It's just too minimal and it doesn't really catch the big picture of the emotionality of ADHD and the time management stuff and whether the school, itself understands. I mean, that's something that comes up all the time. I come from a family of special educators, have nothing but respect for teachers, but it isn't part of teacher training either.
Yeah.
Most teachers don't really have, a lot of background in ADHD and executive function and what that looks like in the classroom. Unless they've gone out of the way to do it themselves, because it's not really emphasized in teacher training from what I understand.
Yeah, so it's really a deficiency across many disciplines that are out there of how in-depth the training might be for different professionals that interface with kids and families and have to flag this diagnosis.
Hey, Stephen here. Sorry to interrupt. We just wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about this week's sponsor. At Attention Different, our mission is simple. Offer ADHD adults proven practical strategies for living a more balanced, fulfilled ADHD life. And that is why we are thrilled to offer our latest course, Thriving with Adult ADHD. While other courses might focus on the pain and struggle of being an adult with ADHD, and we do not want to minimize that, this course is designed around accessible, relevant, and applicable techniques that address the most common challenges facing ADHD adults. Inside Thriving with Adult ADHD, you will learn how to better understand your adult ADHD and gain clarity about how your brain works. You'll learn to find balance by optimizing medication, self-care, and professional support. You will learn how to gain confidence and take control of your life through tailored, actionable solutions. Thriving with Adult ADHD features 2 hours of on-demand video, 10 downloadable resources, lifetime access to the material, and a satisfaction guarantee. Go to attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. That's attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. Hey, thanks for the quick break. Now back to the interview.
I'm also curious because you've written a lot about mindfulness and kind of brought some of those messages. How did you get into mindfulness training, writing, and all that kind of stuff? What brought you into
that? Actually, it's almost, I can, over the course of the discussion, we can tie these two things together, but I would add one thing before we transition fully, which one thing I think is unique about ADHD is it's not just only about the lack of education. It's also unique to have something that has so much abject misinformation and judgment out in the ether, so it's not only that the information's missing for some people, it's that there's just flat out misguided information out there online too. And that's a very unique situation. I mean, not only to ADHD, but that is among the conditions where you have all this public pushback, it creates a whole other level of self-judgment and everything else, which is part of the segue, I think. I feel like I got very lucky at the beginning. I mean, lucky that, I was living in the Bay Area in the 90s, and it was kind of in the ether. That was when everything started getting big. So some of the more famous national teachers who are famous teachers now of mindfulness and all were like giving like local talks. And actually one of the other doctors, being in Berkeley, my parents used to joke when I started doing this that, living in New York, I had to be very careful talking about mindfulness and pediatrics. But at the time I was living in Berkeley, where you can just put out a placard that said doctor who meditates and everyone would show up. So, in the Bay Area, it was just kind of out there. And then what happened was one of the doctors who was training me introduced it at like a noon conference. And I really just liked it right away. I don't know, I feel whatever, it just clicked for me right away. Probably for lots of different reasons. And so then I started studying it a little bit and practicing. And the way I remember it is, it was very supportive for me. I mean, we haven't defined it yet, but for all the, quick sales and cliched stuff that turns people off to mindfulness, it's actually incredibly practical and hands-on, and anybody can do it. And we can define it all in a second. But really, in the end, it's sort of like training yourself to relate to real life as well as you can. It's like training yourself in like awareness and patience. And when isn't that good? There's a lot more to it than that, but it's not about a still mind. It's not about being calm. It's like, for me at that moment in time, residency was, really, really challenging. Everyone has their stuff. It's not unique to being a doctor in any way. And it was just a helpful support during all of that, to be able to train myself to stay settled and deal with my anxiety at the time and all the rest. And, with or without ADHD, with or without a busy mind, that's something anyone can do. And so I did that for a while. And then I started getting, a little more curious about the research and started going to a couple of conferences. But when I say I got lucky, I mean, part of what happened professionally for me is there's been, if I'm giving a talk, you can show there's a curve of the research that supports mindfulness that people use. That's like an exponential launch of mindfulness research.
And the popularity of it and acceptance of it is
not separate from the popularity. I mean, the popularity too, but the research, the science, follows that. The science behind it follows this research curve where it went from 1 study, 2 studies, 10 studies, 100 studies, whatever it comes. Now it's like 1,000 a year coming out or 500 a year coming out or whatever it is. And I got lucky because I got introduced to it right at the beginning, so I, as a professional, was getting interested right when the research was taking off. And then I literally went to a huge conference in DC where the format was all these amazing mindfulness practitioners, not even mindfulness, Buddhist practitioners, really. I mean, not that mindfulness is telling anyone to be religious. It's just you can't, that's what mindfulness comes out of, or Eastern teachings. So used to not be able to say that on screen, but that's the reality of it. No one needs anyone to convert, but that's where the tool comes from. Primarily. And so the people on stage were like the Dalai Lama and, people. And then the interesting thing was there were 2 or 3 people who were intense meditation practitioners who were also brilliant scientists, like Mathieu Ricard and Alan Wallace. And they're like these PhD scientists who also practiced. And over the course of this conference, which was set up in this brilliant way where somebody like Robert Sapolsky was there as one of the most well-known researchers. You guys know of him. So Robert Sapolsky was there talking about the science of stress and all the stuff he talks about. So these, because of the setup of the conference, they could get anybody they wanted. So the scientists were brilliant. And then instead of just this wonky, boring conference setup, they would present on a topic and then they would round table the discussion on stage. So like 2 or 3 scientists and these practitioners, and it was just like, what does this mean, this research, and how can we use it, and where might the studies go next? And over the course of the weekend, for me, it was one of those times in life where just like this light bulb went on of like, hold on, I'm working with all of these people who are struggling. Parenting is so hard to begin with. Parenting kids with developmental differences is exhausting sometimes. You're being asked to do all these things that are so emotionally charged, and even something as seemingly straightforward as like, navigating a behavioral plan. Some psychologist a therapist is saying like, oh, this would be really helpful at home, and it's like you were, and then you individually were raised one way and now they're telling you to do it differently, and you're totally exhausted by being a parent. And now you're supposed to stick to this, new plan and then problem solve it. And even when you're emotional, stick with it. And that's all so hard.
Yeah. And the parents themselves having ADHD too, probably.
Yeah. I was just about to say the same thing. It's like asking someone who probably shares the condition to operate at 100% in every category of their life. Like you've got to be an A+ rock star for your kid in all these ways that you're trying to show up for yourself.
Right. And you can't be, right? No one's an A+. And that's part of it too. We talked about the inner critic in the introduction, and all of that's true. And over the course of that one weekend was when, for me, it's just like this light bulb went on of like, well, this is silly, because I've been doing this for like, at that point in time, like I've been practicing for myself mindfulness for like 10 years and was all interested in the research, and just was like, well, this makes no sense. Like, why aren't I just sharing this with, anybody who wants to hear about it? And it's still not, it's never been part of my practice where you must do it. It's just like, if it's there for anyone who wants to hear about it. And in that moment, I was like, okay. So then I started doing some of these bigger trainings that had to do with how do you teach this, and, how do you, bring it into everyday life. And certainly, for me, the core premise that I love this one teaching, I might as well say it now, because we're going to be talking for a while. There's this core teaching of ask yourself if anything you hear, is it true? And that really clicked for me right from the beginning of like, as we talk about mindfulness, as you hear about mindfulness, it may sound, by the way, can I swear in this podcast? I don't even know.
That was part of it.
So, okay, just checking. So it may sound like total bullshit, and you may have heard it and seen it in ways that are just totally make you queasy and turn you off. But the real core teaching that really makes it valuable to me is this premise of, as you hear about it, ask yourself, is it true? Ask yourself, does this resonate for me? Does it mean something that I can use? That's, does it make sense? Is it, does it sound like garbage? I mean, again, the word often sounds like garbage, but if you pause long enough to just listen to, what's actually being talked about, it should feel like, oh, that makes sense. Even when it gets deep and in the weeds, it still should feel like, yeah, that sounds really hard, but it still makes sense. And it can be really challenging. Sometimes a phrase that gets used a lot is like simple, but not easy. Like, is it better to be aware of what's going on instead of not aware of what's going on? Of course. Is it easy to live that way? Not so much. To tie it back to the ADHD thing, you have this really, really challenging medical condition, and the entire world around you may be telling you it doesn't exist and medications are dangerous. And if you just tried harder, you'd do X, Y, or Z, and all these implied messages in the world seeing with clarity matters in any situation, even if it's a challenging situation. If you can just see like, okay, and then the second half has to be the compassion piece of like, once you look at that, you might say like, it can be really overwhelming. And that's kind of mindfulness in a nutshell. It's like, there's just value to seeing what's actually going on with a sense of care, and that takes training, because life is overwhelming sometimes, and it knocks us on our heels, and we get really caught up in our shit and reactive and off base, and we don't see so clearly. And it's really hard to change habits. However we see the world, it just gets so locked in. Anything that helps us like navigate it with awareness and patience and care just makes whatever challenge it is easier to navigate. And that's why mindfulness is possible, with or without ADHD. Because mindfulness doesn't say your ADHD is going to go away. It's a way of training yourself to live with whatever you're living with. Today's podcast is about ADHD, but it could be anything.
It helps across the board with a lot of different things. Maybe not everything, right? But there's some conditions, but
And having said there's something that huge, I do want to bring it back down in one small way, or one big way maybe, which is to say like, that doesn't mean it's a fix for anything. It's not meant to be sold as a fix. It's just like, if we practice these skills, it helps. That's it. It's not, it shouldn't be sold as like a cure-all for anything at all.
Yeah. Well, but for you, like in terms of how it was helpful for you, it sounds like you'd been doing this for a long time. Do you want to share at all about your own journey or diagnosis and how that plays in?
Well, when it comes to mindfulness, some of it, it's hard to like lay it out moment by moment. I can only just sort of reflect on where I am now compared to where I was when I was younger, like in my early 20s and mid 20s. I think it has profoundly changed. Two things. One is certainly I was very perfectionistic and hard on myself growing up, just part of my nature, whatever it was, my upbringing, my nature. So that tendency, so we haven't defined it yet. So one of the, I love the fact it's been taught for like centuries, is the fact that most people have this inner habit of being really way more critical to themselves, about themselves, than they would with anybody else.
Right. Self-judgment. Yeah.
Right. Self-judgment, self-criticism, sometimes called the inner critic, which is what Stephen used in the introduction.
Yeah.
And just about anybody I've ever spoken to recognize it in some way or another. Obviously it's different for everybody. And it can be really intense and confusing. It's just there all the time. And it means that, when we screw up, that first inner voice is like, you did it again. Everyone's looking at you. You never get anything right. You'll never succeed. You've tried so many times. And it's just this like, I used to, there's a famous teacher around the inner critic named Sharon Salzberg, and she recommends giving it a name. So she used to call hers Lucy from Peanuts, but I always pictured like Waldorf and Statler from the Muppets, who are just like the two old men up in the balcony who are just going to always say something negative about what's going on no matter what. And and Kristen Neff at Austin's done a ton of research showing that there's just this huge benefit to working with that. And if you can shift that inner dialogue, it can sound kind of odd, but it's not, because basically what it comes down to is you can't make it go away. It's a pretty much ingrained habit. It can get much quieter over time, because it turns out a lot of thoughts perpetuate themselves basically because we just feed them. We get so much caught up in them. The stories just keep escalating and escalating. Yeah. So the practice of being aware of the voice without necessarily trying to suppress it, which is never a useful cognitive trick. It doesn't really work to try to suppress things, but just sort of recognize it, like, oh yeah, it's the practice over time. For anyone who lives with a big inner critic, this isn't a fix. Hearing about it right now, it's a practice. But the concept of you can learn to recognize it and label it and sort of say thank you anyway, like Waldorf and Statler. It's like, thanks for the feedback anyway. And then come back to the self-compassion practice, which is more a learned practice over time of just reminding yourself in any moment, like, what would I say to a friend right now? And it's not forced.
I always love that technique. That specific technique is such a simple and great starting place. Of like, would you say the same thing to a best friend of yours? Right.
Right.
Would you say this same self-critical, self-judgmental thing that you're saying to yourself to your next of kin?
Right. And, and most 90% of the time we wouldn't. And really all it is not all the time, but most of the time. And it's just reinforcing like a habit where you just get in this habit of not. And now, I mean, it's probably not coincidental that I switched from being terrified of public speaking to public speaking all the time because, you start to recognize like, right, there's that voice of like fear of speaking in public again. And honestly, thanks anyway, it's going to be fine, So what were you going to say, Aaron?
Oh, I was just going to say, so to kind of give a definition that kind of sums all this up, it sounds like it's like non-judgmental present awareness that you're bringing.
Well, we're talking about two very closely related things because now, since having shifted to the inner critic, that's part of the definition. So the definition, non-judgmental awareness, is what mindfulness means, basically. Yeah. Mindfulness is a training to just try to catch yourself and see with clarity what's going on right now. So if we're going to talk about mindfulness, you can look at it. I mean, again, the quick and dirty is, there's parts of life where our resilience is going to rely on actually experiencing the positive things going on, right? So that, on a really, really busy day where you're feeling stressed, you often give no attention at all to the moments where things are that actually could make you feel better, that actually could, or if you want to bring it to parenting, one of the things I sometimes point out is like, if a child misbehaves once an hour all day long, that is going to feel like the worst day ever. And yet that does mean that most of each hour they were doing the right thing. And, and it's a hard practice to recognize like both things are true. You're not ignoring the challenges, but there's a huge amount of value to come back to this definition of mindfulness, to the practice of just giving awareness to the positive moments when they happen. And there's so much research coming out around that. And it's a training. Like there's a new program I'm not even that familiar with it yet, called the Positive Affective Training. And part of the premise of that training is that we all, when things are going really badly, or if we're prone to anxiety or mood issues, you kind of forget to pay attention to the positive stuff. Yeah. And and again, the through
you're stuck in survival mode, kind of.
Yeah. But then it becomes a habit almost of not even noticing them. And none of these practices are ever meant to be forced. You can't make yourself happy. You can't make yourself relax. You can just do things that make it more likely those things are going to happen. So in the Positive Affective Training, which is kind of a mindfulness training, it's like a structured way of like a few times a day when something positive is going on, try to give it your full attention. Gratitude practice can be part of it. Whatever it
gratitude
is, like make
a big benefit in my life. Yeah, the taking a moment to notice something you're grateful for and let it work.
Right, and even that, some people, like the term can make people feel like they want to, wretch, but really it's meant to be real. You can't force that either. But, probably for most of us, I'm sure there's moments of time this can be a hard thing, but most of the time for most of us, there's something to be grateful for in life, and then the flip side of that, which can be hard to understand around mindfulness, is it can be really difficult because a lot of the time you're trying to avoid something that's really challenging to see. And then that never helps, like if there's a problem or a difficulty, or if you want to bring it back to ADHD, ADHD causes challenges that can be interpersonal and difficult, or, you have to, if you want to manage time blindness, you have to admit you have time blindness, if you want to manage, you want to learn a different way to handle like the emotional reactivity that comes along with ADHD. You can't change any habit without first acknowledging it's there. So it's not always warm and fuzzy, but it is an acknowledgement that sense of seeing with clarity what's going on is the only way through anything.
It's the radical part of the radical acceptance that we preach about, right? Like there's a fun part and an empowering part. There's also a sticky and crunchy part. You got to admit the things.
Yeah. So that's like the big part of that's the non-judgmental awareness definition. But then the compassion, it's sort of without compassion, it can just be overwhelming and brutal. So that's why the full definition includes what you were saying, Aaron, of like it's non-judgmental awareness with a sense of caring and compassion, which is where it starts coming to the inner critic and compassion for others and things like that.
Yeah.
That's really important to kind of have both. And I think people are resistant to, like, even us talking about it just brings this up to me, that I think people are very resistant to looking at things in a non-dualistic way of like, either it's good or it's bad, or either it's pleasurable or it's not pleasurable.
My gosh, yes. Yeah.
And I think what mindfulness kind of helps us to do is to kind of look at those things as judgments in and of themselves, and like the struggles and the pain and the pleasurable things are all there for us to observe and have important lessons and experiences to be gleaned from those things.
Yeah, absolutely well said.
Yeah. I've lately taken it out of sort of the gendered conversation sphere, but like binary thinking, right? That dualistic thinking. Usually the conversation I have with my peers colloquially is like, hey, that binary form of thought is a judgment. You know what I mean? Like you've already started from a place of black or white, red or the green, bad or good, evil or, and that you've already taken without even realizing it, that first step into the land of judgment. The self-compassionate talk is so interesting to me. I was blessed. I was like very blessed. And it only took 20 plus years to look backwards and realize how lucky I was that I had a mother who, through her own kind of force of will and self-education, without knowing it, was practicing a form of mindfulness and also like CBT with her kids. And one of the things, Aaron knows the story, one of the things my mother said very early on when I was like 10, 11, 12 was, hey, that voice inside your head, it's you, be kind to it. Right. And this idea of like, it's going to say shit that is irksome. It's going to say stuff that's funny. Like you can laugh when that voice inside of you makes you laugh. You can feel those feelings, but ultimately it's you. You're better off if you love that voice. Right. And I took that as a profound thing that she said without understanding its profoundness until many years later. But she was speaking from her own ADHD experience. Right. She was speaking from a place of her own conflict and inner critic.
Yeah, many people just take that voice, whatever it is, whatever the nature of those thoughts or what it's telling you, at face value, and think that whatever it's saying is true. So whether it's they bend towards the negative or judgmental side of things, they'll just say, well, that must be true. That must be important. Why else would I be saying this to myself? But I think what your mom kind of did, Stephen, which is pretty profound, is like encourage you to have a different relationship with that inner voice. And that's so key. I think, Mark, you kind of do something similar with your patients too. Is that right?
For sure. And I mean, I want to add one thing to that, and then I'll talk about that, which is, the other way the inner critic often manifests and then people over-identify with is perfectionism, which is very closely related. The assumption.
If graphic arrows are pointing at me. Right.
Right. Yeah. And it's so common that people just assume that harsh inner critic constantly telling them they have to be perfect and go is the only reason they're improving, even though, it fails that litmus test of like, but really, would you ever coach a 7-year-old that's the way through life? It's like, of course not. Strong mindset means, you work really hard and you learn from your mistakes, and it's okay to say you screwed up and ask for forgiveness and all the rest. And that's just what you tell a young kid. So, all the research suggests that other really common manifestation of the inner critic, which seems like it's our lifeblood. It's like, I was certainly a perfectionist when I was younger. Actually the research kind of suggests when you let go of it, you're more likely to both feel happier and persist better, because when you screw up, it's not a catastrophe. So,
or you'll never start them. I think it burns the candle at both ends, for the record. I mean, like the perfectionism can prevent you from ever taking the risk in the first place.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah.
And then it also can burn you out on the back end, right? Too many iterations, too many attempts at it, just letting something be, right? I think it burns the candle.
How could you do anything that's profoundly difficult? Like, again, to tie it back to ADHD, like so many of the things with ADHD that are helpful seem really, like they cognitively seem like I should is always such a red flag of that's a buzzword. Like if you're shooting yourself, you're probably somewhere in the inner critic world. So
is that a sign of perfectionism? I should be able to do that.
What's that?
Is it a sign of perfectionism how much you're shooting on yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And it's such comes up in parenting all the time. And the point is like if you're going to navigate most difficult things in life, you have to screw up and make mistakes and adjust and try again. And that's how life works in most places. And without some capacity to let go of the perfectionist and do that, you're going to, like Stephen's saying, you can't do something new because you're immediately done because you can't do it perfectly, so you got to work with that if you're going to.
Yeah. I like the tragedy of, feels like the tragedy of the commons. Like there's this increase in anxiety and responsibility and stakes in our lives such that I think we become more prone to perfectionistic thinking, no matter like a diagnosis. I think it's just like, if it's not perfect, X, Y, and Z person or project or job or whatever will fail, right? That fear of failure gets so high, the higher the stakes get in our lives. And I've experienced this directly where I said recently, the adolescent kids, I'm already sounding like that old man on the porch, like the adolescent children, they don't understand how good they've got it. And it's in your teens and 20s where you don't have a tax on novelty seeking energy and excitement. Like it comes to you for free, right? For outer free, that energy that says, I'm going to jump on stage and dance like a silly person, right? Or I'm going to try stand up. I'm going to try like that, that motivating drive that comes for free when you're in your 30s, 40s and older.
Steven's talking about his experience. This may not be everyone's experience.
Somewhat in others, but yeah.
Because Mark was talking about the crippling public speaking and anxiety.
Yeah. Everyone has their own path. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saturating this in my version of it, but I mean whatever that risk taking behavior is. We don't have that wall. Typically, the same wall of perfectionistic hesitation, like the perfectionistic thinking that makes you stop before ever taking the risk. If that makes sense.
That may be true, Stephen, but what would you say, like, for those same adolescents and college kids you're working with when you tell them, like, well, you're kind of overwhelmed by managing college. So, what we need to come up with is some new system for managing, your schoolwork, and then, like they try it for a week and the first try, they just forget it and then they're done. So it's like on the one hand, they may be life of the party and dancing on stage, but then when you really get in the weeds of like, okay, but this is really hard, and there's the wall comes down.
Sure,
but it's like that was too hard, too fast, and it didn't work. I'm done. So I think so those same kids may be having a little different view on perfectionism. Like I should be able to just manage my schoolwork. So if this didn't work, screw it.
I think that was me at that time, actually. I mean, you described me. Like, I didn't struggle with the get on stage and do the thing, be the life of the party. I did struggle with.
You still don't, but yeah.
Yeah, right. No, that's not true.
He's realizing he's struggling a little bit more with some of the perfectionism. We were actually just talking about this.
Yeah. No, I bring this up on a personal level because I think it does. But without opening, the Pandora's box on a whole different topic of discussion. I think that this is just a proof positive of like we are not fixed personalities. We are fluid personalities. They bend and change over time. And what might have been my perfectionist tendency in high school or college has changed dramatically now. Like it's what used to come very easy and natural to me. Now there's a tax on it. And that tax is the internal critic.
And I kind of wonder too, if it does dovetail with your self-awareness and your own self-judgment in some way, because like when you're unaware of how you're being, right? Like the more you're interacting with the world in this state of just, I'm acting kind of without thinking, right? Just impulsively running on whatever those impulses are, those drives are that come naturally.
Yeah.
You may not be kind of like hesitating and thinking about, well, what is everybody thinking about me? Or how do I appear when I do this? You're not kind of looking at all of the risks and being so perfectionistic,
right,
per se. And so you just kind of act. But then as you build more and more self-awareness, or you internalize some of those messages from the outside with people telling you, why did you do that? That was too much. Just these different critical feedback messages, sometimes that can become more internalized. And there's this positive, but also can be detrimental thing of like, you're building up self-awareness, but how do you now separate that awareness from caring so much about what others are thinking or preventing yourself from taking the risk of looking like a fool, being cringe, as people say nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to do some of those things to experience life and to do big things. So it's just interesting interplay between the two.
Yeah, I was looking through my list of questions for Mark, and I was like, I hope one of these is mine coming up because it's not really there on the page, but this feels like a question for Mark, like, and it can apply to like the younglings as well. When the way that Aaron framed this is really good. That we with ADHDers in particular, we want to drive towards improving self-awareness. From everything from physical to mental and emotional, right? Like, physical for the clumsiness and how much space are you literally taking up, and did you knock over that person's drink? To mental and emotional, how you are regulating or dysregulating, and how it's affecting your peers in the classroom. We want to improve that self-awareness. But to Aaron's very point, the more that I've become mindful, self-aware, and really, I think what we're talking about is like not self-judgmental, but self-critical with a non-negative or positive, just like introspective, right? The more introspective I've become or allowed myself to become, the more inevitably, the more room there is for those negative judgments, for those intrusive thoughts to kind of dance and play around.
I think that may be true in the short run. I think, there's the phrase, I don't remember where it comes from. Everyone I start to talk about like phrases and things, they can sound so cliche. It's really important. Just like, is it true? Like, forget the words. Is the concept true? The concept is like the only way out is through. It's like if something challenging is going on, you're never going to come out the other side of it to a place you either managed it or feel comfortable with it, unless you just, live it, see it, go at it. As long as you're ignoring it and everything else, it just, tends to fester and grow. So whatever it is. So I want to be a little nuanced here, but the whole point of managing ADHD isn't like it's inherently good or bad. I mean, it's a medical condition that happens. It's highly impactful. And, by definition, the diagnosis includes impairing some aspect of life. Like if you don't have it, like you can have traits of it, but to get diagnosed, it has to be impacting something. So that's the nuance. That's what Aaron was saying before about life isn't so black and white. It's not yes or no. So like seeing with awareness with ADHD, off the top of my head, you can argue it both ends, because a lot of times ADHD is standing between somebody's life as it is today and all the cool things about them and everything they're capable of and how brilliant they are because of the struggles ADHD causes some people. Conversely, sitting with, either the, like the bare facts that, ADHD causes time blindness, and that's usually impactful in my life. Now what am I going to do about it? And I've just been fighting with people my whole life over the fact that I'm always late and just, and the only way through that is to figure out some way to navigate it on a relational level and come up with a solution if you choose to. Plus the fact that, there's this level of judgment about the interventions and treatments, and I should or shouldn't do this, that, or the other thing. So the more, so developing awareness is absolutely in the short run going to cause it. Anytime you face something for the first time or see it with real clarity, it can be a ton of upheaval and upset. But the only way out the other side, the only way through it is to that place of like, seeing with clearly, making the decisions you can make that makes it, makes things easier, accepting, and working with the things that are more challenging without the inner critic, like that, again, it's just what Aaron said before. It's not either or. We all have stuff we have to work on. We all have things that annoy the crap out. It's both ends. We all have things that annoy the crap out of everyone around us. The only way to navigate them is to both work on them and apologize for them at the same time,
And what you're alluding to is, I think, adopting a different attitude or mindset as you approach not only this condition of ADHD, but how it's impacting our lives on a day-to-day basis, right? Those impairing things. Because I think it is contextual. And what I'm thinking is like, because you mentioned earlier about kind of some of that, the positive effective training and things like that.
Right.
And I think there isn't a lot of research in terms of like one's openness to trying things or optimism, and how that can skew people towards, actually doing things a little bit more towards self-improvement if they can orient their mind towards seeing and recognizing those things, right? Like when you stop, as you said before, like stop and recognize those positive experiences, relish in those a little bit. Even if it's not like you're doing this all day, but just stop and pause and like, hey, that was really nice. Like we don't have to always go right to the problem or the negative or the worry.
Basic psychology, one of the fundamental things that we can recognize is there's something called the negativity bias, which is, it's like it's a survival instinct. It's not wrong, but it's a survival instinct that the things that feel scary and off hold our attention, which is good. It's like we need that because that's what keeps
in certain contexts. Yeah.
In certain contexts,
being threatened by something.
Right. And if we don't work with that pattern, then we're going to get in a situation where we go to bed at the end of the day and that's all we notice. That's all we remember. So the mindfulness part isn't ignoring that because that's a safety mechanism.
No,
it's
don't suppress
actively
it.
Trying to see the big picture. And that's where, growth can happen and change can happen around it.
Yeah.
Seeing the fullness of the whole picture. Yeah.
Cool. So, this is a good time to segue into our next section. So you recently wrote about something called, and actually this is very important to me. I've recently, I'm going to take a few steps back and introduce this question a different way. I have, as of this last week, had a lengthy discussion with an adult, a friend of mine about, who's a woman who got like a later in life diagnosis for ADHD and is just beginning her medication monitoring journey. And I find that I have this experience constantly with friends of mine who call either my partner because they're friends with my partner, or call me and say, hey, you got an ADHD Tonti on Instagram. Yeah. You seem to know about all this stuff. Could you talk to me for an hour and a half about all of the medicines and what it all means? Yep. So you recently wrote something you called an urgent message about ADHD medication management. And your core observation was that almost no one, patients or doctors, is happy with the current state of care. Could you expand on that? I could wax philosophical.
Absolutely. 100%. I love that question because it really ties everything together. Honestly, we can start with a 1 or 2 sentence transition through the lens of mindfulness, which is around medication. There is like nothing but judgment and misinformation out there. So people are ducking it because everyone tells them they shouldn't need it or they're dangerous or this, like things that are factually untrue. So, not that you would literally make this a mindfulness practice, but as you practice mindfulness and get in the habit of questioning your thoughts and questioning your stories and, just the concept of like this preconceived notion of medication is just unfair to people. I think it is just makes like parenting is hard enough without someone telling you shouldn't be treating ADHD, but you're really treating something. Living with ADHD as an adult is like, can be challenging enough without feeling like you have to, tie yourself in knots because you shouldn't be using medication.
Yeah. You shouldn't need this. I shouldn't have to. This is a last resort.
So you're shitting on yourself again.
Yeah.
So it's that, so the concept, as we talk about that article I wrote, of just like try to let go of the stories, the biases, and as best as you're able, just like see things objectively. My bullet point for parents when I'm working with medication as opposed to meditation is, no one should use anything medically they don't need in life, but no one needs to be particularly avoiding or scared of the ADHD medications. Like just think about them like you would any other medication decision, because everything else is extra. Like no one should want to take a medication, but there's, there's so much extra added to this decision. And the research in ADHD medication is, pretty expansive. It's pretty old. They were discovered a really long time ago. They've been used extensively for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And the basic science of ADHD medication, in spite of how it's talked about, in common parlance and most of our favorite newspapers and magazines and stuff, is that, the research says the few bullet points are ADHD is a medical condition. Don't have a test for it yet, but that's not even that unique. Like, when you diagnose someone with asthma, most people don't get tested for it. You hear a pattern of wheezing, you call it asthma. So ADHD is a pattern of executive function difficulties, but as a medical cause. That doesn't mean you must manage it medically, but that does explain medication treatment. You're trying to, increase activity in a particular part of the brain responsible for self-monitoring. And the research is very clear that as far as we can tell at this point in time, it is highly beneficial for many people with ADHD. Russ Barkley quotes somewhere between, I think it's 80 to 90% of people can get some benefit without significant side effects.
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote the article is they are so, for the most, there are a handful of exceptions, but basically they are so what you see is what you get, that getting to that success rate, which a lot of people listening might be already all up in arms, requires painful and extensive trial and error. There is no predicting what dose people need. There's no predicting what medication is going to be the best fit for anybody. But the goal is covering your entire functional day, whatever that looks like for you. If you're doing all your work late at night, you got to figure that out somehow. It's your entire functional day with no significant side effects. And that requires a lot of doctor or there are nurse practitioners too. So a lot of health practitioners and their people they're working with constantly communicating, because for most ADHD medications, if you're on it for more than a week or two and it's doing anything, that's all it's ever going to do. Things drift a little bit. So it's like there are situations where the medications, like the side effects get a little better over time. But basically, if you really are on top of the medications and change them constantly, if you have side effects on one medication, it kind of doesn't matter in the big picture of ADHD medications, because you just put a line through that one and move on to the next one.
And there's positive and negative side effects, like in terms of the way we're looking at these, or like beneficial side effects that are kind of helpful based on.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I can now sustain my attention a little bit longer, or I can parse out my thinking a little bit better. I can slow my brain down.
Right.
Those would be the positive side effects of the medication.
Why would you call that a side effect, though?
Well, I guess it's just because of taking the med, it's something I'm experiencing now, right?
Well, I guess I would, just a challenge. I've known you long enough to challenge you a little bit. People are going to get scared off when you call it a side effect. I mean, the truth is like with ADHD medications, you're trying to treat ADHD. I hate the fact that the word medicated gets used so often. It's like you're not medicating anybody. You're trying to treat ADHD. They're not perfect because they don't treat all of ADHD. They help mostly with focus, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. They don't teach you to organize yourself or teach you to manage time. But they also don't do most of the things people are worried about when you're on the right one. They don't change your creativity. They don't massively, crush your appetite once you're on the right one. I mean, these are things to watch for as potential side effects. But you should feel just like yourself, but better able to do what you choose when you're on the right medicine. That's it.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of, I don't know, I conflated something that probably isn't an appropriate medical framing or terminology, because I think side effect is more of an unintended secondary consequence.
Correct.
Response to something.
That's how I define it.
Yeah. But I guess I was trying to balance it with there are good things that can come from, or positive effects that can come from using the medication that are beneficial for your life and your contextual experiences in different realms, academically, behaviorally, at home, interpersonally. There can be different, very positive kinds of things. And I think what you're getting to is people do just kind of not mindfully throw out all of the stuff if they experience some sort of unexpected or negative side effect.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. And what you're saying is I think there's both can be true at the same time. There can be some issues in how we're giving the medication, because, you probably would agree that it's not an exact science of which classification of medications we're giving. Is it the methylphenidates, or is the amphetamines or non-stimulants? How that's done is kind of a little bit of a guessing game, and based on the doctor's experience, and some bias that enters in there. And then also it's like the trial and error approach of, well, let's just take this for a minute, report back, self-report back what is going on for you. And there's some amount of error that is involved in that. That's not exact either. But that, I think that can scare people away. They can look at that as like, oh, well, is that a reason to not take it? Well, no, it's just, that's part of the current treatment right now. We're working to improve those aspects. But generally, these medications are safe, they're effective, and they probably shouldn't be like left as a last resort. Well, probably should be more of a
the research is pretty clear. Yeah, I mean, the actual clinical practice guidelines have started immediately. I don't always do that because I don't think people are ready for that necessarily. It's like I don't disagree with the research behind it at all, but I just think you got to work with
where people are at.
But to sort of tie together what you just said in a practical way for anyone listening, it's not. I think it's a lot about education. I mean, the bottom line is the research is very clear that if you go through the trial and error, which can be a rough few months because the medications don't change much over time, so you can make fairly quick decisions. If you go through the trial and error, the endpoint is good for most people. And the way I often summarize it when I'm working with people is you almost want to draw a line down the middle of a page. And if you have benefits going on, that probably means some medication out there is going to have benefit. If you have side effects going on, that just means this individual medication you're trying probably isn't the one to use. That's it. So, but everything gets conflated. So you try 2 medicines and they both kill your appetite and you're like, I'm done. But that's not how these medicines work. It might be the 5th one that doesn't crush your appetite. So if you're feeling better focused, go on. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just to your point about education, because I want to underscore this, and you answered a question that I want to ask because there's other answers to it, I'm sure. But the experience that I'm having with an adult friend is because a lot of our listeners, for the record, are diagnosed later in life. Some numbers are a big number, and they're playing catch up, right? And the way that we do as human monkeys, as primates and socialized groups, is we call our friends who we know have some bit of information, some bite of information that we trust. They're going to give us this parcel of information. I would say probably the vast majority of the time, that's not a doctor. If you're so blessed that you live in a social group where there is a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, then you call that friend and ask their opinion. But again, it's still not your psychologist. It's your friend, Veronica. You know what I mean? Shout out Veronica. So that experience that I'm having is one that is so common amongst humanity, and particularly here in American West, where a friend says, hey, big win, I got a diagnosis. I'm 35, I'm 38, I'm 42. I know what this thing is now. I'm really excited, but I'm also very nervous. And I walked out of the diagnosis, the place where I got this diagnosis, and I have so little information. I have maybe like a note card's worth of information, and they're going to start me on this medicine, I think, and it's got this dose, and literally that's where the conversation with me starts. What now? And a
lot of times they don't tell. Like the doctors aren't spending some of that time kind of educating the patient because they don't have enough time in the room, right? It might be a 20-minute session. And it's like they don't have the time to say, okay, well, you might experience this, and this is this, and this is. And that discussion takes a long time.
Right. And also just the bottom line, if you hate it, just call me and we'll switch. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
If you hate it, we're just going to keep moving. Don't worry about hating one medicine. Just keep moving.
Yeah, well, so one big takeaway from that I've heard constantly recently is that someone will say, well, I took it today. Here's how it felt. I'm going to take it again tomorrow. I may even take it this week. But then, if it's not working for me, then I'm going to bail or I'm going to switch, right? And I will then begin what Stephen is used to calling my sneaky soapbox, because it'll take me an hour, but I will ask a series of targeted questions that eventually get that person to expand that idea from 1 to 2 weeks, 2 to a month to 6 weeks. Right. Starting by saying, well, a medication monitoring period is much longer than 5 days, my love, right? There's more of your life that this medicine will get integrated with. So I'm curious, if using that as an anecdotal example, what are some things that you wish every newly diagnosed adult knew?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One thing we definitely haven't said that's really important, which is fundamentally different about these medications, is they're not strictly weight-based. So the intuition that you want to get away with as little as possible is off, because, the analogy I use, although I totally recognize that.
For the record, that's something I hear constantly, is people are like, well, I only want to take a low dose because of X, Y, and Z reason.
Right. So low dose doesn't make sense with these medications because the brain doesn't work that way. And it's, it's not, I know it's not a great analogy because eyeglasses aren't as big a deal as taking a medication, but theoretically it's more like getting an eyeglass prescription, right? Where like too little is not going to be right and too much is not going to be right. You just got to find whatever happens to fit your eyes.
That's the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, that's how ADHD medication works. Thankfully, it's just like day-to-day dosing. So again, you got to try a bunch of things and pick which one fits. The second thing is you're not going for just work or just school, because it covers, ADHD covers your whole day. So you're just, you have to individualize the length of effect that you need in your life, because everyone's lives are different. And a lot of people have to be functional through much later than that and whatever else. That's the second part of it. The third is just the middle ground between what your friends were saying, Stephen, and what you were just saying is the stimulants in particular, like they're not changing. So it doesn't have to be 6 weeks necessarily, especially if you don't like it. I mean, like if it's mild side effects, you might ride it out, but they sometimes go away. The benefits aren't going to get bigger. So I don't necessarily even wait 6 weeks sometimes if it's just clear. Sometimes it just feels like you're just drinking.
What's the Goldilocks zone for you?
Yeah, exactly. So, one way to pull all this together, because I know I'm just aware of the time a little bit, and tie the whole conversation together, as you were talking about late diagnosis ADHD and why all of these things matter so much, is because you have to get the medications right for most people with ADHD, in spite of how it's talked about in the community. That's kind of like a evidence-based statement. Then there's this second piece that has to do with like the life management part, the organization, planning, and time, that has so much to do with just non-judgmental awareness of like working with habit, like we talked about earlier, and just like trying to come up with a new way of doing things for skills. There's a Zen quote I've been using a ton recently, which applies here, I think, really well, which is everyone's perfect as they are and has something to work on. So like without giving yourself a hard time for it, recognizing like, I've never done X so easily and it doesn't make me a bad person, but I'd be better off if I worked on it, and that's the second part. And then the third part, which we barely touched on, but is one of the things actually mindfulness has been shown to be most directly impactful for, is the sort of inner critic and emotional regulation, because, that's a big part of ADHD for many people, because it's often, there's Russ Barkley's famous quote of, it's not a disorder of not knowing what to do, it's a disorder of not doing what you know, which has such profound implications. Kids with ADHD are being corrected at like a 3-to-1 ratio versus praised by the time they hit kindergarten in a couple of studies. There's a huge aspect of living with ADHD that has to do with emotional regulation and the inner critic, which are kind of intertwined a little bit. They're separate and intertwined.
Pause me for a second. That breaks my heart, and we rushed right through that. Like we could spend an entire hour-long podcast just on that statistic, and like
100%. Yes. It was a quick summary.
3-to-1 critical. I mean, like you're describing, like, Marlena's cool with this, but you're just my ex-fiance, you're discussing literally the issue that my ex-fiance and very good friend is having now in her late 30s, about the fact that every person of authority in her life convinced her she was broken in some way. And that
which is awful.
Is awful. That's awful. Yeah.
So that's where, to me, I've never presented mindfulness and self-compassion as like a fix for ADHD, but they are like a foundation for ADHD. Because if you start working with mindfulness and self-compassion, which also starts to develop emotional regulation skills, which can be also, related with, that is so foundational for shifting everything else, that it kind of just, changes your whole path at that point. So it's not meant to replace anything else you're doing, but it's like the glue or the foundation so often, because it's a direct set of training tools to work with self-compassion and patience and emotional regulation. And go for it, Stephen.
Well, you said a magic thing. I made it. That when you make a mental note, Aaron will know this. Sometimes you make a mental note as a podcast interview and it just has to go away with the wind because the conversation changes direction. Earlier in this conversation, when we said that mindfulness isn't a cure for something or a fix for something, I looked up, I was like, define fixative, because I wanted to see if I could be clever with this thought in my head. And I was like, mindfulness isn't a fix, it's a fixative. right? It's a glue.
That's good. I like that.
It's a sticky thing.
Yeah.
Like,
You can use it though. Yeah, you can keep that one right on that's good.
The ground report just
I like
there.
that.
I think it's a foundational thing, because if you are trying to apply these tricks and hacks and tools and strategies and things like that, and it's not working for you, there might be some of this stuff that's getting in the way, which could be, what's your mindset? What's that inner dialogue? What's that stuff you're telling to yourself that's dysregulating you and not allowing you to approach those things, those tools, in ways that can be more effective. And like, I think it's kind of like you're saying, it's a foundational practice. And it allows us to get out of our own heads and get out of our own way to be able to do those things differently, approach life differently. And I even think it goes back to the medications, right? Like, if you're thinking, oh, I want this to work right away, and I'm expecting it to solve everything, and those are a bunch of expectations.
Right.
Understanding what the medication does and doesn't do, and it's not a cure. It's not going to fix everything, but it's going to marginally make certain things better. And a lot of times people, their own self-awareness can get in the way, right? Because they may not see a difference, but their partner or their teacher or a parent or someone else may see a pretty big shift in their behavior. And it's important for you to ask those people around you, how am I on and off this medication? And one other thing I wanted to say,
which requires a lot of self-confidence to even ask that question.
Boy.
Yes.
We've got some stories for that. Yeah. It's important to do, crunchy to do.
And one other thing I wanted to say about what Stephen brought up earlier, which was like, when someone points out those side effects or something and says, okay, the medication, it's not working for me. What they sometimes neglect to consider is, what are other factors? Because it may not be the medication that day. That's why we have to track it over time. That's why you can't just try it in one day, be like, didn't work, right? You actually have to track it over time. I would say probably a good baseline is probably about, a week, at least, maybe 1 to 2 is kind of probably, I think, average. But, look at things like, how much sleep did I get? What did I eat? Right? If
someone really pissed me off at work,
like, did I some other situation, and like, did I get enough water today? Right. Did I eat enough protein in the morning when I took the medicine? Because if my stomach's feeling a little upset, could that be part of this? So, sometimes just adjusting another aspect of what you're doing that's producing the side effect could improve your experience on the medication itself.
The other thing, Aaron, that you said earlier in the session that applies to the inner critic, like we're talking about it now, is, you might have to let go of that sense of self-criticism and shitting on yourself to even give yourself permission to try something new, like the medication or whatever else. So that's why it's foundational, because as you just let go of shitting on yourself and self-criticism, then you give yourself permission to try other things sometimes.
Totally. Ooh, there's a lot. We've it's like been like a fire hose of information, I think, for people out here. Just like
We covered a lot of ground in a healthy amount of time, and my concern is that to jump into an entire section with just like ADHD and kids and parenting could be another.
Let's skip that.
So I'm thinking instead that we move in, Aaron, to our typical line of questioning. Like, let's hone in on radical acceptance and meditation and mindfulness, like some more the practical side of an ADHD, sitting in the meditative posture, doing their thing, and what does it mean to be, all that stuff. So, Aaron, take us away.
So Mark, what are some things that you would offer up to people who are beginning this practice right now of some helpful ways to approach practicing mindfulness or meditation in their lives?
I think probably the good starting point is looking at your perspective even before you start. I mean, there's 2 or 3 things to think about even before you start. One is that you really want to let go of any expectations or pictures of what you think, probably for most people, of what you think meditation is supposed to be or not supposed to be. So you just got to let go. You're not supposed to shut off your thoughts. It's actually part of the practice.
Clearing your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're not clearing your mind. One thing I sometimes point out is like I practice for, I don't know how many years, 30 years now, something. And like, your mind is busy all day long. The moment you sit down to meditate, it's going to stay busy. That's normal, and it's okay because there's a whole, again, if we had another hour, it's like more like looking at like relating to our thoughts and the habits our thoughts have and the pattern. It's like, there's a lot to it, but there's nothing you're trying to make happen. So it's okay. No one can be a good or bad meditator. It's all just about learning to relate to whatever's going on as well as we can. So just drop the fact that it's good or bad. In fact, one little subtle spin, it's a bit intense, but you can think about it a little bit, is if you're restless and your mind is busy and you practice for 5 or 10 minutes, being able to sit with that, that's a good thing. Like, it's okay. It's like, that's a good skill to develop. That's a perfectly healthy skill to develop. And if that's what happens in meditation, that's your weightlifting for the day. That's fine. So just letting go of your preconceived notions helps a lot. And then the second thing is there's lots of different ways to practice. So the purpose of practice is, again, like a gym program. You're not trying to relax today. You're trying to set up conditions that might help you be relaxed, less stressed over time or whatever other intentions you have.
Yeah.
So that, so there isn't just one way to do it. So like if someone's trying to teach you a breathing practice, you're not trying to control the breath. It's really just that there's some physical movement to the body and it's just something to pay attention to. You can do sounds, you can do walking, you can do yoga. It doesn't have to be any one thing. So the basic premise is just practice, and then there's layers to, by the way, Stephen, I know you, I appreciate you having tracked down that one blog. I just posted one yesterday about this concept of like, there's lots of different things you can practice. So think of it just like practice. You want to practice self-compassion, practice self-compassion. You want to practice a little bit of concentration, patience. It's like, there's lots of things to choose from. It's not meant to be one thing. So if you want to get started, that's the perspective to take of just practice. And then the really, really important second part of that, which almost can be its own little mini ADHD training too, is that anything new in life, if you're going to make a habit of it, just requires a lot of structure. There's that one liner within ADHD that can be so helpful of just assume if it's not scheduled, it's not happening. So make a schedule, find a partner and reminders, and then come back to self-compassion of like, you didn't remember for 3 days. Whatever, try again tomorrow. How would you coach a 6-year-old? So getting started, to just summarize that all together is like, practice, just for the sake of practice, be structured about it because otherwise you'll forget, and be kind with yourself when you forget, which you're going to anyway. I think that might be how I would summarize it.
Are there any good tools, any apps to recommend?
That's another great question. There are definitely, just to put in context, because it comes up so often, there's lots of different types of meditation, and they're all, for sure, have their own benefits. What we've been talking about today is usually referred to either as mindfulness practice or insight meditation.
Right.
So, so you pick what you're going to work with. Well, I'm only saying that because lots of different apps teach lots of different things. My stuff is mostly, largely on the insight meditation timer, which is mostly free. And that's a great start. It's very, there's a lot of stuff on there. So you kind of want to be narrow in what you're looking for. You can get really just distracted by the volume. And then there's another app called just the Mindful app, which used to be Mindful Magazine, that I'm on. That's very good. Dan Harris's app is good. Headspace, there's a lot of them out there. A little bit of it is just remembering, since the goal is just practice, don't shop all that much necessarily. Maybe try something for a while and then
maybe try out a few things. A lot of these apps, Calm, Headspace, they usually have programs
and that's the last thing I was going to say. And a lot of them have introductory programs that are really good. Unwinding Anxiety is a nice 30-day introduction that's out there. So the programs can be helpful. Classes can be helpful. I actually have a new Mindful ADHD class on the Insight Timer that went up a couple months ago. Which always integrates like how do you treat ADHD with the mindfulness part. It's not either or.
Right.
So those would be a few. And I have a mindfulness page on my website with a bunch of other resources and stuff too.
Okay. Let's see if we can find that page too, so we can just shout out about that.
Well, the website's developmentaldoctor.com. So if that's going to be.
Okay.
We're getting sneak previews of your pluggables.
Of what?
Sneak previews of your pluggables.
Am I plugging too much? I didn't mean to. I just mean to be like just resources is all I'm trying to give you.
No, we shamelessly plug you here on this podcast. It's good.
There is no boundaries, no walls to the number of times or the quality of your plugging.
Okay, I'm looking on here. I'm on your site. It's under mindfulness.
Under resources, there's a page which has apps and stuff like that.
Okay. Mindfulness resources.
Yep.
Or technology and children resources.
Well, some of it, that's a different page, I think.
Okay. So mindfulness resources. So developmentaldoctor.com/mindfulness-resources. Mm-hmm. You'll find it.
Yeah. Great.
Nice.
All right. I think I need to wrap up on my end pretty soon. You guys.
Ditto. I am going to get kicked out. So, since we're here, are there other pluggables? You mentioned the blog that I was looking. There's tell our listeners where and how they can find Dr. Mark Bertin. And
the easiest thing to do is just go to developmentaldoctor.com. Okay. I have a blog on Psychology Today. I have classes on the Insight Meditation Timer, but a lot of other stuff going on through the year. So developmentaldoctor.com is the best resource.
Great.
Excellent.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for your time and coming on the show.
Attention Different podcast.
So great seeing you both. Yeah. Next time in New Orleans. So
we'll have to run into you soon. Another conference, another jazz fest, some other time. All of
Sounds
it.
Perfect.
Voodoo Fest is no more, but there will be an opportunity to come to New Orleans when it is not 95 degrees, feels like 102.
Just send me the info. Sounds great.
Yeah. The Attention Different podcast is hosted by me, Stephen Tonti.
And me, Aaron Smith.
The Attention Different podcast is produced by David Grabowski, who also wrote the theme music.
Edited by David Grabowski and Ian Lopez.
Visit us at attentiondifferent.com, where you can learn more about our team, discover resources, and much, much more.
We're on Instagram at attention_different.
And you can watch all our episodes like this one, plus tons more free content on youtube.com/@attentiondifferent.